Kale, a silhouette against the setting sun, surveyed the familiar expanse of the overworld. His worn leather armor was a second skin, his diamond pickaxe a comforting weight at his side. For seasons, he had traversed these lands, the rhythm of mining, crafting, and building a predictable lull. The distant bleating of sheep, the gentle rustle of leaves, the periodic hiss of a creeper. These were the symphonies of his existence. But lately, the tune had shifted. A discordant note, subtle at first, had begun to hum beneath the surface. He'd noticed it in the silence. Nights usually teemed with the shuffling of zombies, the rattling of skeletons, the skittering of spiders. Now, there was often an unnerving quiet before the sudden synchronized surge. Creepers seemed to approach with purpose, not just random wanderings. Skeletons fired and volleyed not scattered shots. Even the Endermen, typically solitary and unpredictable, sometimes vanished and reappeared in unsettling unison. Upon his return to the small, fortified village on the plains, the unease was palpable. Villagers, usually bustling with the trade, now barricaded their doors earlier, their wide eyes reflecting a fear Kyle rarely saw. Elder Barnaby, the village cartographer, a man whose life revolved around the meticulous mapping of every ravine and cave, seemed particularly distressed. His usual cheerful hum was gone, replaced by a low, worried murmur. Kale found the elder hunched over his grand map table, illuminated by a single glowstone. Barnaby's finger traced erratic, unsettling lines across the parchment. He pointed to a constellation of red marks, clustering unnaturally around an unexplored desolate plateau far to the north. These weren't the usual random mob spawns. They were lines of movement, converging patterns. Barnaby's brow furrowed, his normally serene expression contorted with a deep, almost ancient dread. He gestured to the distant mountains, then to the unsettling convergence on his map, his gnarled hand trembling. Kale understood. Something was drawing them, organizing them. He spent the next few days preparing. He crafted more arrows, sharpened his sword, enchanted his armor. The villagers watched him, their silent gratitude a heavy cloak. On the third morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Kyle bid a silent farewell to the uneasy village and headed north. The journey was unlike any he had undertaken. The familiar mob patrols were gone, replaced by larger, more disciplined groups. He bypassed a phalanx of zombies, their arms outstretched in synchronized advance, led by a particularly hulking brute with glowing red eyes, a variant he had never seen. Later, he witnessed a group of skeletons, their bony fingers already on their bows, awaiting a command that seemed to come from an invisible leader before unleashing a devastating volley. He noticed strange totems, crudely assembled from bone and rotten flesh, marking paths that mobs followed with eerie precision. These were not random creatures. They were an army. As he ventured deeper into the northern plains, the landscape grew more desolate. Trees were twisted and bare, their leaves long since withered. The ground was scarred, patches of mycelium spreading like a disease, hinting at a corrupted influence. The air grew heavy, thick, with an almost tangible sense of dread. The ever-present thump-thump of a zombie, the clatter of a skeleton, morphed into a low, resonant hum, a pulse that seemed to vibrate from the very earth beneath his feet. Finally, after days of treacherous travel and narrow escapes, Kale reached the plateau Elder Barnaby had marked. It was a bleak, scarred expanse, bathed in an eternal twilight despite the sun high above. In the center, rising like a jagged tooth from the earth, stood a colossal obelisk of obsidian and dark stone, pulsating with an unnatural violet light. Tendrils of shadow snaked from its base, seeming to cling to the ground and coil around the twisted trees. This was the source. This was the heart of the uprising. The air around the obelisk crackled with raw, malevolent energy. Hordes of mobs swarmed the plateau, not aimlessly, but patrolling in tight formations, their eyes gleaming with an eerie intelligence. Zombies dug trenches, skeletons formed firing lines, creepers stood guard like sentient landmines, and at the base of the obelisk, directing them with silent telepathic commands, stood a figure unlike any Kale had ever encountered. It was a massive, armored zombie, its skin mottled green and black, clad in a patchwork of dark steel plates and bone. Its head was crowned with jagged obsidian shards, and its eyes burned with the same malevolent violet glow as the obelisk itself. This was the Grave Lord, the orchestrator of the mob uprising. Kyle surveyed the scene from a hidden ridge, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The sheer number of mobs was overwhelming, but their organization was the true threat. He noticed a pattern. Every few minutes, the obelisk's pulse would intensify, sending out a shockwave of dark energy that made the mobs stir, their coordinated movements becoming even more precise. Then, the pulse would momentarily dim, the violet light flickering before resuming its malevolent glow. This was his opening. He knew a direct assault was suicide. He needed a distraction, a way to thin their numbers and reach the obelisk during its brief moment of vulnerability. He began his dance of death, drawing small groups away with well-aimed arrows, then dispatching them with swift strokes of his diamond sword. He dodged the explosive fury of creepers, using their blasts to create craters that funneled zombies into tight groups. He scaled small hills, raining arrows down on skeleton formations before dropping into the fray to carve a path through their ranks. The Gravelord watched, its head slowly turning, its violet eyes fixed on Kyle. It lifted a heavy, obsidian-studded arm, and the mob surged with renewed vigor. Endermen materialized around Kyle, their unnerving gazes locking onto him, ready to strike. He narrowly dodged a phantom's dive, its screech echoing across the desolate plateau. This was a battle for survival, and for the very balance of the overworld. He pressed closer, using the terrain to his advantage, ducking behind crags, utilizing the barren trees as cover. He could feel the obelisk's malevolent hum vibrating through his very bones. Finally, he was within striking distance, the Grave Lord a formidable barrier between him and his goal. The Grave Lord moved with surprising speed, its massive fist striking the ground, sending a shockwave that threw Kyle off balance. He rolled, narrowly avoiding a follow-up blow, and countered with a flurry of sword strikes. His enchanted blade bit into the dark armor, but the Grave Lord barely flinched, its focus unwavering on its task. It was like fighting a walking fortress, each blow resonating with dark power. Suddenly, the obelisk pulsed, its violet light flaring with blinding intensity, empowering the Grave Lord further. Kale felt a wave of weakness wash over him, but he pushed through it, knowing this was the moment before the lull. As the intensity peaked, the Grave Lord raised its mighty arm, preparing a devastating strike. Then, for a split second, the obelisk's light flickered, dimming to a faint ember. The Grave Lord paused, its arm still raised, its violet eyes losing their brilliant glow for a fleeting instant. This was it. With a primal yell, Kale lunged past the momentarily stunned Grave Lord. He ignored the enraged roars of the surrounding mobs, the desperate flailing of their limbs. He brought his diamond pickaxe down with all his might, aiming for a small fissure near the base of the colossal obelisk, where the violet energy seemed to concentrate. The pickaxe struck with a resounding crack. A shower of sparks erupted, and the obelisk shuddered. The faint light inside it dimmed further, then flared one last time with a desperate, dying gasp. The Grave Lord roared, regaining its focus, its eyes blazing with fury, but it was too late. With a final, shattering boom, the obelisk exploded, not with fire, but with a silent implosion of dark energy, The violet light winked out of existence, replaced by a lingering wisp of ethereal shadow that quickly dissipated into nothingness. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The coordinated advance of the mob ceased. The Grave Lord, its connection to the source severed, staggered, its imposing form shrinking, its dark armor crumbling to dust. It let out a guttural, confused moan before collapsing, reverting to a pile of rotten flesh and bones. Around the plateau, the mob suddenly seemed to awaken from a trance. Their unified formation broke, skeletons stumbled, their boughs clattering to the ground. Zombies turned in circles, their vacant eyes scanning the desolate landscape. Creepers began to wander aimlessly again, their fuses sputtering without command. The menacing hum that had permeated the air vanished, replaced by the familiar, chaotic sounds of the overworld at night. The aimless groan, the random rattle, the uncoordinated hiss. The uprising was over. Kale stood amidst the scattered remnants of the mob army, his body aching, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The twilight that had clung to the plateau receded, allowing the pale light of the true moon to filter through the clouds. The threat had been immense, unlike any he had ever faced. The memory of coordinated mob intelligence, of a unified force, would forever haunt his steps. He began the long journey back to the village, no longer just a seasoned adventurer, but a silent guardian who had witnessed the terrifying potential of the overworld's darkest inhabitants. The balance had been restored, but Kale knew, deep in his core, that such a deep well of malevolence, once tapped, could rise again. He would be ready. The overworld demanded nothing less.